Welcome to the SAMPS podcast, bringing you advice and insights from sales and marketing professionals in life science.
Hello everyone, this is Harrison Wright with SAMPS, that is, serving sales and marketing professionals in scientific research. I'm here also with Axel Tandberg, who is founding partner at PrivacyWorks. Now on 18th of June, SAMPS will be holding a conference in Gothenburg in Sweden, and Axel will be presenting a talk entitled GDPR and Marketing in the Life Sciences Industry. A very pertinent topic right now. So Axel, could you give us, to start with, an overview of where we stand with GDPR in life science marketing today?
Well, with the introduction of GDPR, we had a big change in Europe of what's deemed to be personal information and how you can use that information within the life science industry. For instance, the word personal data is not the same as personal information in the US and the rest of the world, where in the Europe nowadays through GDPR, it's more extensive and includes much more information than it used to with the old legislation, and that's been done all over the rest of the world, which means that you have to be a bit more sensitive when you start using data from Europeans. And then we had the other part, which I mentioned, which was the consent. The word of consent. Consent we used to be able to get consent from a person by just informing them and writing a paper and so on. It was fairly easy in a way that they usually do in the rest of the world. Well, if you see for the US, for instance, it's much easier to get a consent from a person. Whilst in Europe nowadays, a consent in itself needs to be voluntary, specific, and individually collected, and straight from the individual in that sense. Therefore, when we start using personal data within research and scientific working or for marketing purposes, when we come to life sciences, we need to, as this has been deemed as health data is a special kind of data that need consent to be able to use, we have to gather consent from the individual. And as this data and the consent now has to be voluntary, as I said, and it has to be done in a certain fashion, we have to, in the life science industry, to lean more heavily on the doctor, that they have informed the patient about what we're going to do with the data and how we're going to use it for research and etc. And in a sense, it has to be voluntary, and then how can you prove it's voluntary, and how can we use that in the correct fashion? And there is so much here that differs, that the paperwork has to be done, and it's been more and more of a bureaucracy, which also gives in a way that doctors are not today very much in favor. They can be a little bit less in favor, I would say, to gather consent, because it's a tedious job for them to do. It's not part of what they want to do. They know what the product and the research is good, but at the same time, they want to make the patient good. They want to heal the patient and make them well. So that's part of the problem which I see, but there's a lot of things how you can do it to make it better. And at the same time, there's also not all the time where a patient is at the hospital. So how can we gather data for a person who's not in the hospital? There are different ways, and one which I think is fascinating is actually the thing to start using blockchain technology of how you can use and gather data. And for me, it's a way to move forward while you can prove that the patient has given his consent, or the person that you gather information from has given his consent for us to use it. And you don't have to go through the medical doctors anymore. You can use the app. There's 320,000 or 325,000 apps out there who can collect health data. So why can't we use that data in an innovative way, and prove that we have the right to use this data for research purposes? And we can also, through the blockchain technology, prove a study, and that the study has been done in the correct way whilst collecting data from one person through a longer period of time. And that person will be part of the study as long as he or she wants to. I think this is it's a way forward that I think we could really work on with. So this is what I'm going to talk about on the 18th of June in Gothenburg, where I really look forward to seeing all these people.
It's really interesting, actually, because especially last year, you couldn't stop people from talking about blockchain, but you saw the most ridiculous thing. It was almost like you were getting companies or organizations just inventing any old thing and sticking blockchain on the top of it. Say, hey, this is really interesting, and of course all these people would invest in it because anything that says blockchain on it was of course fascinating last year. But to actually see something that has an actual application that is useful and viable, well, that could be very interesting.
Well, it's the same thing that I think it was 10 or 15 years ago, we all talked about big data, which was the big word, and now blockchain has been the thing. But what did we come out? Big data is what we use and want to use for the studies, but at the same time, how can we gather this information in the correct fashion? And that's where I think the blockchain technology really can help us. And I am really interested in, and I think this is a way forward, and I would like to make the marketing and the life science industry to use this and be able to use this information and the technique in a correct fashion, because as through blockchain you can interact with the individual and make sure that the individual understands and how the data is going to be used, and it's always the individual who has the right to show that the data and show data, what data is being gathered and how it's going to be used. And that's the best way to get information from an individual to use in a study or, for instance, marketing purposes. Because if you are going to market a product afterwards, you have done the research, you want to reach the market, you want to get out there, you have to be able to one thing you have to do is to prove that you've done it in the correct fashion, but also through your marketing, you can actually show that these people had this problem was helped by this in this fashion. And what a better way to get that from the individual, straight from the individual itself, than to go through a doctor who has to explain this in a very special way. And of course, people do trust their doctors, but do we trust the doctors? That's another issue.
You know, I don't know about you, Axel, but something I find particularly compelling about this is, beyond legislation and compliance and all those kinds of things, is what this means for the individual versus the mass market. And if you look at the evolution of marketing and sales, it seems to follow this pattern of going to the mass market and then going to the individual and then going back to the mass market. And so, for example, before the internet and digital marketing became commonplace, the primary way that B2B companies would sell and market was by individual methods. Okay, they might place ads, but for the most part it was about using the telephone and face-to-face meetings and making calls and all those sorts of things. And then with digital marketing, it became the inbound that we're all familiar with, where you have content marketing and funnels and everything else, but it was very much one size fits all in terms of the content that was being put out and the messages that were being received, and then it moves to an individual level on the phone or face-to-face, whereas now it seems that we're having a shift where that online or otherwise mass marketing is becoming more and more individualized, which is very exciting.
Well, actually, you're totally right there as well, because the marketing, the way you use marketing has always been going back and forth. How we're going to best tailor to the public that we want to meet, and how to get the message across is also one of the biggest issues. And I think the way we're moving now, as you said yourself, is to an individual tailored mass marketing, in a way that the more you know about the person you're going to speak to, and the individual or the company or who you're going to get access to, you can tailor your message according to certain variables. And that is also being used in the correct fashion, and that also is based on data. And how to get data and use data in that fashion is also one thing that GDPR comes into and tells you that you have to inform the subject of the data you gathered and how you're using the data. And this is being done by publicly posting privacy notices, etc., on the web pages and wherever you can get access to them. But you also have to inform them when you contact for the first time how you got the data and how you're using the data and how that's been come forward. But what I think is the best part about this is that we're getting a better transparency within the marketing industry when it comes to the use of data, and also a transparency within the life science industry of how we want to gather and inform and use the data. So for me, I think GDPR has been very good in that fashion, that we're starting to see that data is so important that we need to treat it right to be able to use it.
Absolutely. And the great thing about this as well is that, back when people first started talking about GDPR, it was common to see it as a threat. Oh, all this new stuff we need to do. Oh, what a pain. Oh, this takes me away from what I should be doing, which is marketing, and making me focus on compliance, which I really don't want to do. But the other way of looking at it is it's an opportunity to evolve the way of marketing itself.
Absolutely, and I think that's where we can get the best part of this, because marketing has now been deemed to be, in a sense, evil, because we are being using data in a way that people haven't been expected that we could use it, and we've been looking at data in a way that we could not think about. We could use data in about 20 years ago when we started doing this personalized calls and everything. We couldn't get everything. Now you just do a click, you just do a search on the internet, and you can get quite a lot of information about an individual. But how is that data to be used for marketing purposes or not? Why is that data out there, and how can it be used? It always has to go back to the individual, and they can give it a bit of understanding of why, and I need to know more about you, and so on. I think it's good in the sense that we give power back to the individual. So it's not a commodity in the sense that's owned by a company. It's a commodity owned by the individual.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's a moment too soon that we see the end of scraping lists of thousands of people off the internet and sending out mass mailers.
Oh, yeah, no. That's going to be interesting. I think that's one part that's going to be looked upon a bit with the GDPR. And you might say that, oh God, as you said yourself, the GDPR is a hindrance to my work, but absolutely it's not. It's actually a way to give it a better flavor to it, and by not scraping everything and trying to get all the information from an unknown source, why don't you go to the source itself, which is the individual, and talk to them and get to know them better? In a sense that, by playing with open cards, you get a bit of a trust, and by giving trust from an individual, you get an ambassador in that person, in the other company that you can use and to spread your word in that company, and therefore sell better.
Definitely. It strikes me there's a window of opportunity here for maximum effect as well, because eventually everyone's going to be doing this, and it won't be special anymore.
No. And then there's going to be a new method coming up, and we're going to change the whole thing around again. But for the moment, this is the way forward. And if you're on the train early, you get a ticket an early train. You might as well ride in the first class cars instead of ending up in the third class cars and trying to fight with all the others. No.
Absolutely. Well, Axel, thank you. I presume that someone attending in Gothenburg will get a lot more insight on this topic.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to going to Gothenburg and seeing and meeting and talking to all the people. And, I'll be there all day, and they can talk to me afterwards or before if they want to, and we can keep discussing these and other subjects.
Me too. Well, for all of you listening, we look forward to seeing you there. You can actually register online at sampsoc.org. That is SAMPS, S-A-M for mother, P-S, SOC. So it's SAMPSSOC.org. It'll be great to see you there in Gothenburg on the 18th of June.
To get more from SAMPS, visit www.sampssoc.org.